Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the General Eclectic Podcast. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and this is Rod Dreher. Rod, so it's been a busy week on the blog front. You've got lots of stuff going on, from the New York Times to the further advance of through the institutions of all things woke. What are you thinking these days?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking it's all bad. It's just, the wokeness, it just never ends. Like, do you know that they're still going after Joshua Katz at Princeton? You know, from last summer. Oh, yeah.
I was going to say that's more than a year ago.
Yeah, Professor Katz and you know, one of his chief antagonists there in the classics department at Princeton is a classics student, a Dominican kid, a person of color, Daniel Padilla Peralta.
That's right.
Who was mentored by Joshua Katz, and
I didn't get that wrinkle. I didn't realize that was part of the story. That's really interesting. Well, what's this? The young guys. What's his beef? I mean, what's the deal?
Well, his beef is that he said this. The New York Times gave him a recent profile. He believes that the classics, that is the study of Greek and Roman culture, history, and rhetoric, etc., that it allows for white supremacy. It feeds white supremacy. I mean, what is the argument for any of this? It's all racist, and
whiteness, right? And supremacy, and
and you know, they're trying to get the entire field changed. This guy's really radical, but that's not how it quite started with Joshua Katz at Princeton, but that's where it's going right now. And it's
how did Professor Katz get into hot water in the first place? Well, certainly he's not a guy who gets up and says, "Yay, I'm pro-white supremacy." I mean, what has he done?
No, this was all last summer, I think it was. There was something came out, you know, after George Floyd, all the universities went into spasm. Yeah. And they put out something basically saying that they were going to a proposal to make Princeton an anti-racist school. And I forget the details now, but it was going to have if this had been voted into power at Princeton, it would have had a dramatic effect on freedom of speech and so on, freedom to teach.
Were they trying to sign on to the University of Chicago statement?
No. They've already done that. But no, this would have added something else. Well, Katz spoke up about that, and he spoke up in defense of free speech. That was it. Suddenly, he was the bad guy, and they came at him hard. He fought back hard. Professor Robbie George, also at Princeton, and others stood with him. But, I mean, you know, it doesn't matter. All the good deeds the man has done and his distinguished teaching awards, none of that matters. Well, I mean, and he's a liberal. He's a liberal.
I mean, my question is, like, I mean, what does Aeschylus have to do with white supremacy? I mean, what does the Bacchae have to do with, you know, American wokeness and American, you know, white supremacy? I'm kind of baffled by the stretch here. If I were trying to see this thing reasonably and sort of steel man the argument, you know, I'm struggling to find the connection other than it's sort of part of, I guess, the establishment of modern universities in the West.
This is your problem, Kale. You're trying to reason with this. And in fact, it's a revealed religion. We saw this, well, in the past week, just since this week, maybe it was Monday. Yeah, it happened on Monday. Donald McNeil Jr., the guy who's the lead COVID reporter at the New York Times, was forced to resign after being accused by these kids, by prep school kids, of various sins against wokeness. Well, that came out this week, but I bring him up now because it turns out it didn't matter that Donald McNeil denied this stuff, that Donald McNeil had plausible explanations for all these accusations that these kids leveled at him. All that mattered was that the accusation was made. And it was a particular kind of accusation. None of the kids on this trip were black, but they one of them said these are kids who go to like Andover, $78,000 a year. These kids, the fact that they said that they felt he was putting down the shaman or disparaging a shaman, all these lunatic accusations of these thin-skinned teenagers cost this man his job, because simply the fact that he was accused managed to get many of the black reporters at the New York Times, according to this latest report, against him without even listening.
I was really struck by the refrain from the executive editor. I'm not sure what his official title is, but Dean Baquet. He kept saying, "Well, Dean, you've lost you've lost the newsroom. The newsroom won't work with you anymore." And I mean, look, Rod, I have zero experience working in a newsroom. Back in a former life, I was a regional reporter for a small-time golf magazine, Tee to Green magazine, out of Jackson, Louisiana. But, that was pretty much it. I didn't really have to fight with anybody in my newsroom. I just had to make sure my 300-word, blurbs were ready to go, or my editor would kill me. I mean, like, what is this? What's going on? I mean, you have newsroom experience.
Yeah, that is one of the... It shows how much the New York Times has decayed as a journalistic institution. Dean Baquet, the editor, told Donald McNeil, according to Donald McNeil, that you've lost the newsroom. The newsroom won't work with you. As you said, well, since when does the executive editor, or the editor-in-chief, whatever his title is, of the New York Times or of any newspaper, let the employees decide who they will and won't work with? That, to me, is a real sign of weakness, on the part of the New York Times leadership. They are allowing these politically correct mobs, politically correct sounds so quaint, but these woke militant mobs to decide that this man does not even get a fair hearing. Donald McNeil, the fact his mere accusation was enough to make them pass judgment on him and to say they wouldn't work with him, and therefore to push the spineless Dean Baquet to request his resignation.
Well, and I spent probably an hour last night reading through the whole transcript that McNeil put on Medium, and it's worth your time. I'll put a link on the bottom of the video here. But I was just struck by the sort of the willful misreading of what he is, and that a couple of things. 40 years that he's worked at the New York Times meant absolutely nothing. No. And then I was thinking, well, maybe this guy's just kind of a hack. He's sort of keeping him around because he's going to sort of finish his career and just sort of hold him on. But the guy is being nominated for a Pulitzer for his work on COVID-19, the coronavirus, and the pandemic. I mean, this is no ham and egger. I mean, he's the real deal, and it just doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter. And look, I guarantee you it wouldn't matter to the Pulitzer Prize jury either. They're going to see him as damaged goods, because this infection, this mind infection, has seized the journalism profession. And what's happening at the New York Times, you can be sure that some version of that is happening in many newsrooms. Even if the newsroom leadership doesn't want it, journalists find out about this thing, and it passes and passes and passes among the community, and the virus is spread instantly.
Yeah, and they're clearly, the upper management, from what I can see, is clearly scared. Like, it's a weird dynamic in which the bosses, right, the people who are ostensibly in charge are not. Like, I'm not sure what to make of that power dynamic. Do you have any insight into that power dynamic?
This goes to show you how weak things are. That it has no experience, or I haven't had no experience in my career of that sort of thing, because the newsroom always looks up. Newsrooms are very hierarchical places, but what has happened just since I left the newsroom 10 years ago, a new generation has come in of college students, journalism graduates, who are very identity conscious, very militant, and very demanding. Yeah. I can remember, Kale, maybe 15 years ago or so, reading some news that came out about how millennials were showing up to their first jobs expecting a promotion within like 2 or 3 months. And wherever I read that, they were just talking about the entitlement mentality, the idea that, I've been here 3 months, I get to roll. And the real world doesn't work like that. Well, it sounds like now Generation Z is so much worse. They're not only expecting to run the thing, they can't imagine not.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's just a Gen Z thing, although I get where you're coming from on that, and how you score the various generations, of course, comes into play.
You're a millennial, aren't you?
No, I'm a Gen Xer.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah, no, I've spent my entire career up until the last couple, teaching millennials, and now I'm teaching Gen Z. But I recall, right, that people just sort of dismissing people's concerns about workplace things like, oh, like, don't worry, when they go to the real world, they're going to have to leave this sort of silly college stuff behind, and that's not how the real world works. And I was skeptical that was a prudent course of action, right? And the reason why I'm skeptical that was going to sort of that the kids,
what's
right?
That?
Well, in other words, like, so all of this political correctness, this wokeness, right? This sort of, cultural Marxism, postmodernism, whatever this stuff is, right? Critical race theory, critical social justice, all these things that we sort of roughly fall under the category of like intersectional wokeness, right? That people would make the argument, well, that's sort of silly college things. Like it's not going to apply once they go into well, clearly it's not, right? I mean, and I think New York Times is clearly suffering through that right now. But I was a skeptic of it originally. I was a skeptic of sort of people saying you don't have to worry about it, because it really felt early on to me, and this is not a point original to me, but it really felt like it was some kind of quasi-religious thing. Like it's a world view that is serious. I mean, it's wrong-headed in my opinion, but it's serious, right? And so I didn't think that it would, quote, just go away. And now we're seeing it. It's not just going away. I mean, do you have any thoughts about this sort of wokeness as a sort of a religion, and that's why it's not going away thing?
Yeah, because it can't be falsified. John McWhorter, we've talked about him before, the African-American linguist at Columbia University. He's been writing like a fiend about this stuff, just tearing it apart as anti-intellectual. But that, it leaves us at a real disadvantage in trying to talk with it, because if you assume that the other side is reasonable, you'll be making a mistake there, as in most cases, as Nicholas Christakis found on the Yale campus in 2015, and we talked about that, I think, in the previous episode.
We did.
So, I mean, you can't reason with them, and I think the problem with these mobs, and the problem with people like Dean Baquet at the New York Times and A.G. Sulzberger, the publisher, as well as, I forget the name of the guy who was the head of Evergreen State College, who just...
Oh, Bridges.
Dr. George Bridges. Just completely, they turned him into mush. These are liberals, old-fashioned liberals, who have lost their nerve, they've lost their spine, and they're afraid to defend liberalism. The mob knows how weak they are, and there's going to be no reason for the mob to stop. Of course, you go back to revolutions. This is how revolutions occur, when the militants can see the weakness at the top.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, to sort of push this church metaphor, seriously, if I've long thought that college, certainly at elite colleges and sub-elite colleges, next level colleges, are seminaries, right? That they are in the business of conferring an explicit worldview that it's become increasingly clear is inimical to what some people call classic liberalism, but fine, right? Liberalism, and so this reminds me of something we talked about last episode, right? In this sense that when a people get together, the actual getting together and enacting the liturgy of the people, right? I mean, liturgy means work of the people, right? Enacting this sort of creates God, right? It sort of makes a sort of super reality. And so it makes perfect sense that these people who were able to go to church for 4 years at a school, a university, would seek to replicate that at the next level. And so what I see playing out at a New York Times, totally from a vantage point from the outside looking in, naturally, is that they're recreating church. Right. And it reminds me, you might remember this from your days when you were Catholic, but at the Good Friday liturgy, when we do the full Passion, and I'm sure you do it in your church as well. But, we cry out as the voice of the mob, crucify him, him. And, uh, I don't, I don't know if I was just a particularly sensitive kid. I don't think that this is the case, but it hurts to sort of say that out loud, but you're kind of saying it all out loud together, and you're sort of engaged in this activity that makes you one, right? That it's sort of this resolution of the many and the one problem. And I wonder if this is sort of the operative mechanism by which you go to church, right? Like if a woke person goes to church in the workplace, that this is their liturgy.
Well, politics takes the place of religion for these people. They find all their identity in politics and in cultural politics as much as partisan politics.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is how what we saw this past week in the New York Times story about what's happening at Smith College, which has been seized by Wokeness. We've talked about Jody Shaw before. She resigned, and she's going to file suit against Smith College because she says that it is racially hostile. And she's also been saying, because it's very woke, it's racially hostile towards white people. She's white. But she has also been saying from the very beginning that this is a class issue. And sure enough, the New York Times, of all newspapers, did a really nuanced piece about it. They went down to Smith, and they found that these kids who've been making these college students, they are very woke students, have been bullying the working class people who serve them. People are scared to death of them because they know that all it takes is one of these little snotty tot $78,000 a year students to complain about them, and they're gone. I mean, it's an amazing story of how identity politics has become a way for the people who are on top of the heap already in terms of class to maintain their position.
So, okay. I'm going to go back to McNeil, but I'm going to try to do a tie-in here. But I want to ask you if you noticed a peculiar element of his 4-part article that he put in Medium. And again, I'll put the description down.
Mind you, McNeil is a New York Times reporter.
Sorry, but going back to the New York Times, because I want to try to do a tie-in. Did you notice the almost uncommented upon, but obvious email exchange that he had with Nikole Hannah-Jones?
Yeah. And Nikole Hannah-Jones is the woke queen of the New York Times. And he wrote to her, as I recall, just saying, look, I know that you probably think I'm a monster. Here's what really happened.
Right. And so he said, hey, I'd love to sit down and talk with you. And then a bunch of stuff happens where it makes that impossible. Then he writes back to her and she says, oh, yeah, sure. Like, let's get together. And then he has to write back and say, I'm so sorry. I really can't do it. It's everything's blown up.
Well,
right?
Not because legally he couldn't do it.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, no. But I mean, that's an odd singling out of one person.
Because he knew who the queen bee was.
Okay, so you read the same thing.
Of course,
So she
does
is
anybody
in effect,
doubt this?
Well, so do you think she is the de facto editor of the New York Times?
Well, I mean that would be a big claim to make, but I think it's a lot closer to true than it ever should be of any employee there at any newspaper. It's a discouraging thing, Kale, because I've loved being a journalist. It's been so much fun. I started working right out of college as a journalist in 1989, and I was there for the last good decade of newspapers and also for the next 10 years, which have just been nothing but decline. But newspapers really, really are important, even though, they're biased. We complain about them, this and that. They're so important. And the collapse, though, of the news and media industry, the ideological collapse and the collapse of old-fashioned liberal values of fairness, that's a real tragedy for our country.
Right. I mean, there was such a big deal made in newspapers. I'm sure your entire formation at the Manship School of Journalism at Louisiana State University, shout out, was predicated on the sort of an absolute sort of firewall between the news and the opinion. Right. Mm-hmm. I'm sure this is your formation.
Yeah.
Why did that firewall break down in the dissolution of the American newspaper?
Well, I mean, it's not the case that the editorial page calls a newsroom and tell them to cover this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. But as news has become more partisan and more siloed, thanks to the internet, the competitive pressures have forced newspapers to become more ideological. But I think the thing, though, that is at the heart of it is something it's the same but slightly different.
Okay.
It's the idea that, well, I'll give you an example of it.
Yeah,
it'll be better. I may have talked about this with you before, that back when, like around 2004, when I was at the Dallas Morning News and we were getting ready to talk on our editorial board about gay marriage. Should it be legalized? Should it not be? Let's have the conversation. Everybody's talking about it. Yeah. I was in a conversation in the newsroom once talking to somebody about this, and they said, well, why do we have to have a debate? I said, well, because, there are two sides to it. And this is Texas, and a lot of people are religious, a lot of conservatives here.
Yeah.
This person said, well, we shouldn't give them equal sides in the newspaper. Like, well, why not? We got to tell both sides. He said, would you expect this paper to give equal time to the KKK during the civil rights struggle?
Interesting.
And this person was just a little bit younger than me, right? Mm-hmm. But things had changed. The idea that the cause is so righteous that there can be no two sides, and we don't even have the responsibility to inform our readers that there is another side.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, in your experience in the newsrooms, that this sort of wokeness or proto-wokeness predates the harrowing out of the American newspaper.
Well, yeah, I think the two are connected, but not causally.
Okay.
I mean, newspapers were always liberal places. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But those raised or who grew up in an older culture of journalism at least knew that we had to be fair.
Yeah.
And you had to develop this habits as journalists of asking yourself the hard questions. What am I missing here?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't miss it. But at some point, maybe in the 90s, at some point, the 2000s, newspapers, as they became more and more shrill and identified with the left, they began to see their job, especially with younger journalists coming in, not as telling the truth in any kind of neutral way, but as advocacy.
Yeah. I felt that same thing. It's sort of a moving from an inform model to a kind of a preach model or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, the proverbial long march through the institutions appears to be accelerating at a pretty alarming pace from my perspective. I think our readers listen to me. I think our viewers and listeners might benefit a little bit if you could just tell us a little bit about this whole idea of the long march through the institutions and what that's all about.
Yeah, you hear that phrase a lot, the long march, and it comes from the Italian communist Antonio Gramsci. And Gramsci said that
mid-century, mid 20th century.
Italian marches to the early to mid 20th century, and what he talked about the revolution happening not in one spasm of violence, but rather through a long march of its adherents through the institutions and seizing control of a society and revolutionizing it by controlling the institutions of authority. In other words, they weren't trying to overturn the institutions. They were trying to infiltrate them so they could control them. Okay. And when we talk about the march of the woke through the institutions, this is a key idea in the whole idea of soft totalitarianism that I've brought up, that the way you gain control of a society is, if you're not going to overthrow it, through a violent revolution, then you have to seize control of the means of intellectual and cultural production.
Yeah.
They have the legal profession. It's heavily driven by the woke in law schools, and it's the same obviously with media, the same in academia in general, the same in the entertainment industry, and certain churches are completely subsumed with wokeness. There's the de facto schism in the Catholic Church over this sort of thing. So, you see it moving through an institution after institution. It's coming even to local elementary schools. There was something put out by the Arizona Department of Education I saw today on Twitter a guidance saying that it's never too early to talk to your children about race. It's about how to make an anti-racist baby.
Which is Ibram Kendi's famous other book is Anti-Racist Baby.
So, yep. But you see what's happening. There's no place to get an alternative narrative because the woke have taken over all the institutions with their mentality. So where do you go?
Well, it's interesting. I know I mentioned this last episode, but I just wrapped up teaching Milton's Paradise Lost to my students, and the question that Satan opens up his session of Parliament with is, we need to debate on what we're going to do. We just got our butts handed to us by God and his army in the great war in heaven, and we just got sent down to this place, hell, and it's really unpleasant, and I don't like it. And so what are we going to do? And so what they're going to argue about is whether they're going to engage in overt war or what he calls covert guile, right? And of course, everyone knows that a war, an overt war, is just going to be round two, version two of what just happened. We're going to get our butts handed to us. But covert guile, now there's something we can do, that we can wend our way, serpent-like, into the hearts of these institutions, and we can get the institutions to kill themselves. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me what's so powerful about the way this stuff works, this sort of, it's almost like the difference between conventional war and guerrilla warfare or something like that. Sure. But it's there's many fronts, and it's ongoing. To quote the great Neil Young, it's like rust. Rust never sleeps. All right, so what are we to do? I mean, look, there's no place to hide. I mean, that's in the wake of your Live Not by Lies book. Talk about hitting the wave, because I think when you probably started that book, you may have been concerned that maybe I'm kind of overcooking this a little bit, and boy, I mean, right as this thing is about to go to press, everything just blows up, right? So if there's no place to hide, then what are we to do?
Well, there are a group of Catholics conservative Catholics who are planning to move out to East Texas to start a housing development called Veritatis Splendor.
No, what a weird name, Rod. What is this Veritatis Splendor?
The Splendor of Truth is one of the best known encyclicals of St. John Paul II. Yeah. And so what they've decided to do is they're sick and tired, they say, of having to live out in the world. They know that they need fellowship, which is certainly true. They found out Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas, is open to this. So it looks like that they've got plans to get this thing going.
All right. So I've been on record, and certainly many conversations with you, sort of talking about intentional communities and the Benedict option and all this sort of stuff. But so somebody sends me the link this past weekend, and I click on it, and I'm reading through it, and two things strike me. Number one, all my bells are going off. All my heebie-jeebie, skin crawling, reactions are going off. Right? That's number one. I'll go get to that. But secondly, right smack dab in the middle of this piece, on the Veritatis Splendor community plan and all this, is Bishop Strickland himself. And he says something to the effect, this is not, like Rod Dreher's Benedict option, in which, wait for it, we should run to the hills, but rather it's an intentional community of the faithful. And Rod, I know you're probably just so done with this, but it is astounding that this particular parasitical meme continues to outpace your actual book and your actual idea.
Oh,
what is this?
I don't know. I haven't seen any of the details for this planned community, but
I have.
So well, I can't condemn it, and I can't praise it. I don't know, but this is the kind of thing that the initiative, at least, whether it is well thought out or not, that is within what I'm eating for the Benedict option. Because as I've made clear in the freaking first chapter of the book, hold on, I have to breathe. As I, there is no escape. We have to live in the world. We have simply because there's nowhere to hide. There are no hills to hide in.
Right.
But if we are going to be prepared to live faithfully as Christians in that world, then we need to be living in more intentional, disciplined ways now with each other now. That's all I say. Right. But here you have this bishop who is trying to praise something that would fit broadly into the Benedict doctrine guidelines as being contra me.
Yeah. No, it really is amazing. And I wonder, and I know you and I don't get into this too much on air, so to speak, but there seems to be some sort of cognitive block with a certain subset of conservative-ish, traditionalist-minded Catholics like myself who just can't give you a fair reading. Like, it's just like they just can't do it. And I've even seen other people and people that I like, instead of saying the Benedict option, they called it like the Dunkirk option. And the Dunkirk option is a strategic retreat so that you can strengthen yourself so as to withstand the onslaught, which is exactly what you're saying in the Benedict option. It's just remarkable. All right.
Well, I got to say real quickly, I heard a friend of mine, a Catholic friend of mine in D.C. was at a talk this past week. I think the Claremont Institute sponsored it, and he texted me from the talk. He said the guy up here, Scott, asked a question about the Benedict option and retreating or running for the hills, and the speaker said, "Well, you'd have to ask Rod Dreher about that." And my friend raised his hand and said, "I know Rod Dreher, and I know for a fact that his vision has nothing to do with what you're saying here." But my friend said they seem to. They resolved to keep talking about it as if that's what the Benedict option was, because some people think so. I mean, it's just lunatic. The book is 4 years old and they're still doing that.
No, I've seen it time and time and time again. And every time, I'll wade in. It's like, well, that's interesting because I didn't, I've read the book and that's not what the book says. And then they'll have to cop to the fact that they haven't read the book, right? which to me does in fact get back to my first point. Like, why am I so frustrated by or skeeved out by this article about the Veritatis Splendor community?
Yeah, tell me.
It's strange.
Sounds like you're the kind of place you would like to raise your kids.
Right. Well, exactly. So this is where this strange moment where it's like, well, what do I really think? Right. Because I'm reading this article about something that's happening. And I guess what I struggle with is that I'm not sure that we understand what community is and what community is for. And I'm looking at the plan for the Veritatis Splendor community, and it's a subdivision. It's a suburban subdivision with parcel plots of land for, 4-bedroom, 3-bath houses, that I'm sure are, whatever, right? And there's like a village, there's like a baseball diamond, and there's a plan for this school and that school. And as I see like somebody trying to make, a God's honest sort of stab at this thing, and I'm like, it's just setting off all my bells. Like, this is a dumpster fire waiting to happen.
But why do you say that? I'm hearing you talk about what's laid out there. There's a baseball diamond. I'm like, yeah, boy, I'd love to have a neighborhood like that where I had enough social trust among my neighbors to know that we kind of felt the same way. Our kids are able to go play at each other's houses. Mm-hmm. Where's the problem?
Well, I guess I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is, and maybe I can't go there in my head. But part of it, I'm listening to these people in the article, and they're talking about it, and they strike me as well-meaning people, but I can't help but feel that they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is. Ask myself if I had an opportunity to live in a place like that where people are all Orthodox, and one of the same things. Would I do it? You would think that I would be the sort of person who would say, well, of course I would do it. This is what I'm after. I would really have to think about it and pray about it, because I fear the idea of utopia. There is no utopia.
Well, right. Amen. That's exactly right. And, that's the other book that I read just before Paradise Lost with my students. We were reading Moore's Utopia. And, the book is a wonderful book. It's fraught with all kind of layers of irony and tongue in cheek and all of it. But we forget that utopia literally means no place. right?
And,
And there's no like blank slate restart. It's dangerous. And look, let's remember that utopian projects, for the most part, they always end in disaster.
Well, yeah, but I agree with you. And this is what I get so worried about, the abuse of power. And I've heard from people who, since my book came out, who read the book and said, hey, I lived in a community, a Christian community that was kind of like that, and here's what happened. And they had those kinds of stories. There's no way to escape the human stain. I think, though, that the opposite, to assume the opposite is also going too far, to assume that because that we can't build perfection, we can't build something that be good enough.
That's a great point. And that's where I'm trying to check myself and trying to sort of flesh this out. I mean, I don't know why all of my bells went off, but they did. And I've learned that when that happens, I need to take it seriously. And, it usually means that I'm running up against a situation where I fear that there will be a rank abuse of power. One of my friends on Twitter the other day said, kind of looks like Catholic Waco to me. And I'm like, no, like that can't happen. Like, how do you check the David Koreshes of the world? And, and it's a capturable reality. And I think that this is what happens when something is inorganic. And I hate sort of this, maybe it's an overly simplified metaphor, but it's like, there's nothing more artificial than this kind of intentional community. And how is it then supposed to happen
Exactly. Then you're saying that the Benedict, if anything artificial, and it's deemed artificial by being intentional, and it would be. Right. If that is deemed as a failure before we even try it, then there's no point.
Right. Well, in one of the videos, it really struck me, and this sort of gets us to my last thing that I want to talk about with you today, if you'll be so kind, is that one of the persons being interviewed compared the community to like a greenhouse, right? And you wouldn't expose your flowers to the outside elements; you sort of keep them in the greenhouse. And the thing that struck me was the 2x4 that smacked me in the face as I listened to somebody like Jordan Peterson say bluntly and clearly, look, there's no such thing as protecting your children. You can't do it. It's literally impossible to protect your children. He said the only thing you can do is to empower them and to strengthen them and give them the tools necessary with which to deal with reality. And I think that perhaps is the sort of the nuanced point that you're trying to get at with the Benedict option, that so much of this is sort of this strategic withdrawal to strengthen, not a strategic withdrawal to block off,
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't think that the greenhouse metaphor is a bad one necessarily, because it's true that our little kids need to be exposed to the world as they become morally mature enough to deal with it. Neil Postman, the late media critic, had a book called The Death of Childhood, and he wrote this in the early 90s. He was talking about cable television. He said when the adult world, the things, usually sex and violence, the horrible things in life that all adults know are real, but when those become accessible to children easily with just the flip of a switch, childhood ends. Childhood is this, protected time in which all children or all members of our species are granted certain protections in order to mature. So I think that's probably what they mean. But the folks of Veritatis Splendor. But the question is, and I've seen this so many times among conservative Christians, we say one thing and we do another thing in our houses, and we undermine the communal purpose in that way. And this is just one of the part of being alive at this very messy time. But the kind of things that you and I grew up with, like I grew up in a small town where you could let your kids go to somebody else's house and play because nobody had cable TV back then. And if they did, they certainly wouldn't have let the kids watch, anything inappropriate.
Right.
But those standards are totally gone now.
Well, yeah, I mean, the internet obviously blows that up severely and whatnot. But yeah, so I don't know. It was a real challenge to me this weekend. Honestly, I was kind of in a bad mood all weekend long after reading about this community. And I realize that it's made me sort of think more deeply about what I mean when I say, we need to form intentional communities. Like, well, what is that going to look like?
What is the sacrifice it's going to take from you? And this is the thing that worries me.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I have both, you remained Catholic. I left the Catholic Church, but we saw at a very, at a deep and particular level, what it looked like within a religious community for there to be abuse of power and cover up, and people who had every reason, and I'm talking about lay people, wanting to not know so they didn't have to deal with it. That's just human nature.
Yeah, and
but the fact that we saw it and affected our faith so deeply, I think that's why it just frees up.
Well, I one of the best litmus tests that I have come to recognize when we're talking about Catholic, and I'm talking Catholic terms here, but I'm sure this is operative in other traditions naturally, is the persons that I bring this sort of stuff to first are those people who were part of the Legionnaires, right? Those poor people who were caught up in that evil cult of personality,
the Legion of Christ with
Maciel, Father Maciel.
Father Maciel, yeah.
And I, what, like, you cart it out in front of them and they're like, yeah, no way, not touching that with a 10-foot pole. And these are the Legionnaires, the former people who were in Regnum Christi, or the lay version of Legionnaires of Christ, and the Legionnaires of Christ. They held on to their faith, miracle of miracles, right? And good people, but they read something like this and they're like, no way, not with a 10-foot pole. This is just a sandbox for an abuser, and that's how they, But
I don't know if you realize this, but people putting together the Veritatis Splendor are from Regnum Christi.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah. I know. And
so that's why. Can they be trusted?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the question. All right, so that's a dark note. I want us to say,
let's end on a light note because I've got 7% power on this spare laptop today.
All right, just real quick, I'm super excited. I am a pathetic Jordan Peterson fanboy, and the new book just came out today. Beyond Order. So super excited to look into that. And I promised I would say, we finished Cobra Kai. Netflix show with my daughter Hannah, and it is the 30 years later Karate Kid. And Karate Kid was a huge movie in my childhood with Daniel-san and Mr. Miyagi and Johnny and Ali and all the players. They come back. It's a fantastic show, and it really gets into sort of the complex dynamics of what shapes us, how our childhood shape us, and how our perceptions can get set in stone. And anyway, it's a great show. I recommend the older crowd check it out. It's really good on Netflix.
Well,
I'm serious, by the way. I'm serious.
Yeah,
it was good.
Yeah, I saw over the weekend 2 movies I had seen before and really liked, and I was so pleased to see they held up. I watched with my older son the Russian film Leviathan. It came out in 2015. I think it was Russia's Academy Award entry. It's a political drama set on on the North Sea coast, in which a Job-like figure, a local fisherman, is fighting to keep his property, which a crooked mayor is trying to take away from him. And what it is, it's not only a really good film, but it's also a very acidic commentary on power in contemporary Russia.
Nice.
And this is the kind of thing that I really like. And I watched it, was very excited, but it holds up. I also watched with my other son Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, which I had seen since it came out.
One of my favorite films. I really love that film. So
it
good.
Really holds up. Let me tell you, it's gruesome. It's an action film set in among the Maya, like in the age of the conquest.
Yeah.
But
moments before.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But no, it holds up well, and it just reminds you what a great director of action movie making Mel Gibson is.
It's a pure movie. It's pure. It's pure.
It's in the Mayan language, but it doesn't matter. It's subtitled, but it's so pure. Yeah. Audacious film. And it got overshadowed, unfortunately, by Gibson's drinking problems and things like that. But well worth checking out. And I'm afraid that I'm about to be checked out, according to this Mac.
All right. Well, look, Rod, it's been great. By the way, everybody, you can reach us at the General Eclectic Podcast at gmail.com. This is going to be our first episode that is done under the umbrella of the American Conservatives. So we're really excited about that. And Rod, send us out.
Don't get nothing on you.
All right, man. Take care. You bet. Bye-bye.
All right.